Paul's letter to the Hebrews.
Let us attend.
Brethren, by faith Abraham sojourned in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked forward to the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, received promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and scourging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering over deserts and mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though well attested by their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had foreseen something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect.
Peace be to thee that readeth.
Alleluia. 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 O God, we heard with our ears. Alleluia. 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 The righteous cried, and the Lord heard them. Alleluia. Alleluia. Alleluia.
Wisdom arise. Let us hear the Holy Gospel. Irene pasi, Spirit.
And with your spirit.
Reading is from the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew. Let us be attentive.
Glory to you, O Lord. Glory to you.
The book of the origins of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham became the father of Isaac. Isaac became the father of Jacob. Jacob became the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah became the father of Perez and Sarah by Tamar. Perez became the father of Hezron. Hezron became the father of Ram. Ram became the father of Amminadab. Amminadab became the father of Nahshon. Nahshon became the father of Salmon. Salmon became the father of Boaz by Rahab. Boaz became the father of Obed by Ruth. Obed became the father of Jesse. Jesse became the father of King David. David became the father of Solomon by her who had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon became the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam became the father of Abijah. Abijah became the father of Asa. Asa became the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat became the father of Joram. Joram became the father of Uzziah. Uzziah became the father of Jotham. Jotham became the father of Ahaz. Ahaz became the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah became the father of Manasseh. Manasseh became the father of Ammon. Ammon became the father of Josiah. Josiah became the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile of Babylon, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel became the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel became the father of Abiad. Abiad became the father of Eliakim. Eliakim became the father of Azor. Azor became the father of Sadok. Sadok became the father of Achim. Achim became the father of Eliud. Eliud became the father of Eleazar. Eleazar became the father of Mathan. Mathan became the father of Jacob. Jacob became the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, from whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. And so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the exile to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the exile to Babylon until the Christ, 14 generations. Now the birth of Jesus happened like this. Mary was promised in marriage to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found pregnant by the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her betrothed, who was a righteous man, did not want to make her a public spectacle, and so intended to put her away quietly. But as he was thinking about these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary, your wife, home. For what is conceived in her is by the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you shall give him the name Jesus, because he will be the one to save his people from their sins. Now all this happened so that what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bring forth a son. They shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Joseph arose from his sleep and did as the angel of the Lord had commanded him. He took his wife to him and had no relations with her before she brought forth her firstborn son, and he named him Jesus.
Glory to you, O Lord. Glory to you.
Please be seated. So we read a nice long genealogy. And then we heard the story of Jesus, right? How did he come? By the way, I will tell you, this is more people than I expected today. I expected the chanter and his family, and maybe not, because you might have been asked to chant at the cathedral. I'm already 5 steps ahead of where I thought I would be. And I wish I could say I had a children's sermon, but I don't quite. Here's a question for you. We read this long genealogy, a genealogy that's guaranteed to try out all your correct pronunciations, right? Because you did the commemorations during Orthros, where we commemorated some of the same people, and they do not have Anglo-Saxon or Scottish or Welsh names, do they? And they have all sorts of odd pronunciations, which don't even come across in English, because actually Jesus is the Greek translation of Jehoshua. He actually has essentially the same name as Joshua in the Old Testament, who was a type of the Christ who was to come. But that's another sermon. Because my question for today is, having read all those names, how many women were mentioned? There were women mentioned. Did you catch them? How many women were mentioned? 5 women mentioned. Now, whatever else you can say about the Middle East, they're not tending to be women-friendly, are they? If you're an American woman, you would have a very difficult time living in the Middle East. Well, we could see your eyes anyway in certain parts of the Middle East. Certain parts of the Middle East, you could show your face. Now, in Israel, you could, dress nice and modern. But the reality is, except by special dispensation in the Old Testament, it was the guys who inherited. The women were married off. All that a person had to do to divorce a woman is simply to say, I divorce you before the elders. You can see this in Old Testament law. People descended from the males. That's who gets named in the line of descent. In fact, by the way, isn't that true also in English-speaking countries? Now, I will tell you that Latinos are very machista, but they at least do one thing. Every Latino child bears the last name of both his father and his mother. Okay? So you've seen maybe somewhere written down, I'm Ernesto M. Obregon, and I always insist on the M, and people go, but why not just do Ernesto Obregon? Isn't that sort of silly? Well, except M is Martinez. That's my mother's last name. You see, I'm not just an Obregon, and in Spanish, by the way, the surnames are reversed. I'm an Obregon Martinez. So my name in a Spanish-speaking country is Ernesto Obregon Martinez. The idea that I could just be named by my father's name, it's just not known in Latin America. Now, we're machistas, I'll get out. I mean, I won't try to defend Latino culture, but we do at least preserve the idea that the woman had something to do with the birth. By the way, women who are here, do you think you had something to do with the birth? Yeah, how many hours did it take? Right? At least Latinos acknowledge that. When in a very male-oriented culture, like Old Testament, actually Middle East to this day, has the name of 5 women. I'm glad to know he likes my jokes. Chanter. Just grab them. When you see those names being named, I should tell you, I'm a granddad with 10 grandkids, so it's not like this bothers me. Pretty soon I'll come over and start, grabbing his chubby cheeks and playing with him and forget about the sermon altogether. You need to ask yourself, how and why are those women in there? In a list that has 3 sets of 14 generations, now by my count, that's 42 men that were named, because if you count, you'll find that he's counting the men, the 3 14s. There are 5 women. What are they doing there? Well, let's look real quick at some of their stories. And I'll say real quick because my idea of real quick is usually longer than most people's idea of real quick. But if I say that to myself at the beginning, it keeps me from going on forever. The first one named is Judah, the father of Perez and Sarah, by Tamar. Do you know Tamar's story? See, the problem is we don't tend to read the Old Testament like they used to do in the 19th century, especially in America. People knew their Old Testament. That's why you can read the 19th century American stories and find people named Ebenezer and Josiah. I mean, wasn't there a movie with some Josiah character in it? And so on. It's because they read their Old Testament a lot. Now, here's the story of Tamar. Remember, she's one of Jesus's great 42 grandmothers. Tamar was a woman that actually, though it says Judah was the father of Perez and Sarah by Tamar, Tamar was actually married to one of his sons. You're already interested, right? Wait a minute. What's daddy-in-law doing having 2 kids with his daughter-in-law? It's one of the stories that we're actually rather glad the kids are as young as they are, because someday, if they were older, you'd have to explain it to them. Tamar married one of his sons, the oldest son, Judah's oldest son. The oldest son died. Following the law in the ancient Near East at that time, which Israel followed, she then was married off to the second son. Because that's what you did with a widow. She either A, became part of your household, or more commonly, she was married off to the next brother down the line. That's why in the New Testament, the Sadducees come to Jesus and say this woman was married and her husband died, and she married the brother and he died. All 6 brothers died. Whose wife shall she be in the resurrection? Now, that question makes no sense unless you understand that the common practice was that the next unmarried brother down the line would take in the widow. And the first son would be named for the brother who had died. You're going to see this later on in the genealogy. Okay? All three sons died. I'm sorry, two of the three sons died. Judah refused to give Tamar to the third son on the grounds that he will die on me too, and then I will have no inheritance. Now, that was a violation of law and practice. Tamar had not been raised to be a good Jewish girl. She hadn't been raised to be Jewish at all. So what she did was she dressed herself up. We have kids here. She dressed herself up as that type of lady. Okay? Except in the Middle East, that actually meant you covered yourself more, but added a lot of bangles. So Judah couldn't tell who she was. And when he went on a trip, she went ahead of him and stood by the side of the road. And let's just say, for the sake of the kids, that she persuaded him to be close friends. And after that, it was discovered 3 months later that, lo and behold, Tamar was expecting a child. So Judah, who frankly was a self-righteous so-and-so, calls her out, ready to stone her. By the way, even to this day, what's the penalty for a woman who commits adultery in certain parts of the Middle East? He was going to have her stoned. And she's asked whether she has anything to say before sentence is pronounced. You have got to read this story in the Old Testament. Well, as it turns out, since Judah was just going out on the trip, he hadn't yet made money. And so he said, look, I can pay you when I come back from the trip. And she says, ha, you'll just never come back. And Tamar was, of course, bargaining. And so Tamar says, well, give me your staff and your rig, and you can redeem them when you come back. And he agreed. When he came back, of course, she was gone. And so on the trial, when she's asked, what do you have to say for yourself? She brings out his staff and his ring and says, the man who owns these did this. Doesn't this encourage you to read that little passage in the Old Testament, which actually takes place over a couple chapters? The reason I call Judah so-and-so is all of a sudden he becomes all smiles and he says, blessed are you, I have been the unfaithful one, I didn't give you my son. And he quickly marries Tamar, and that's how she becomes one of Jesus's great-great-great-great-great-grandmothers. By persuading Judah when he's on a road trip. Now, there's going to be a point to this other than funny stories. Am I encouraging you to read the Old Testament maybe a little closer than you thought? So who's the next woman? I'll bring all these women together at the end. Rahab. Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab. Who's Rahab? Have you heard her name before? Yes. She's called Rahab the. You don't have to answer, but let's just say that she was the owner of an establishment. The Israelis were attacking. This was when they had first crossed the Jordan, and Joshua was leading them against Jericho. And so he sends spies into Jericho. You can find this, of course, in the book of Joshua. And the spies figure everybody's going to know we're from out of town, we have the wrong accent, we dress wrong, and so they decide to go to Rahab's establishment, figuring that people who go to establishments like that, the women don't tend to reveal their secrets because you don't get return clientele if you tell everyone who came to visit your establishment. And they begin the officials of the town of Jericho figure out that if the Israeli army is coming closer and they have caught rumor that spies have come in. But Rahab has also heard about this army that's coming in, and she knows they're wiping out everything in their path. Remember, Moses defeated the Moabites already, and he had already defeated the Ammonites, and now he was coming. He had died, Joshua had taken over, and they were coming to Jericho. And Rahab says, you know, I've heard about the Lord your God, and he seems to be a fairly powerful God. Now, at this point, I doubt that Rahab was anywhere near being a true believer. All she knew as a pagan was, you go with a guy who's got the strongest God. I'll hide you if you promise me safety. And they said, if you give us safety, we will promise you will not be harmed. He said, now, and if you know the type of lighting that supposedly is used outside this type of establishment, they said her establishment was up against the walls of Jericho and had a high window let you look out upon the outside, not big enough for people to climb in, but hang a red cord outside the window. And she hides the spies, they sneak out, they tell Joshua, and Joshua tells everyone, the house with the red cord, leave that one alone. When the Israeli army marches 7 times around Jericho, remember that old Southern gospel song? Going around Jericho? The walls fall, except one place. Guess the one place where the walls didn't fall?
Where the red ribbon was.
Yeah, where the red ribbon was. And it's come to symbolize the blood of Christ. That it is by the blood of Christ she was saved, though she did not know it. She becomes a devout Jew, gets married, and she's one of Jesus's great grandmas. Are you beginning to ask yourself, why are these women in the genealogy? They're not what you normally think of as your role models. They became role models. I'll defend them. They became role models. They're in the genealogy of Christ. But man, do they have histories. Next one is Ruth. Now it says, Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth. Who's Ruth? Well, you remember I told you that Moses had defeated the Moabites? Ruth was a Moabite. If you remained a Moabite, you were not allowed to marry anyone in Israel. God said, never shall a Moabite marry into Israel. Now, we tend to look at that today and we tend to think God is making an ethnic statement. No. Ruth is proof that he wasn't doing that. Because what it meant in the ancient Near East is anybody who comes out of the Moabite pagan practices and refuses to change over to our practices will not be allowed. So there was a famine in the land of Israel. This is the book of Ruth. Naomi's 2 sons and Naomi leave Israel. And Naomi's 2 sons married 2 foreign women. Ruth is one of them. Her 2 sons die. And Ruth is left a widow, and Naomi is left with no one. And Naomi says to Ruth, knowing she's a Moabite, well, you're free to go your way. You have been good to me these years. I will go home, and mayhap there'll be a relative there that I can live with. And this is almost, you could call it Ruth's conversion story. It's actually used in a lot of weddings, at least Protestant weddings. Have you ever heard in a wedding the verse used, your God shall be my God, and where you goest, sorry, I got it backward. Where you goest, I will goest, and thy God shall be my God. Beautiful little wedding verse. It has nothing to do with the wedding. It is Ruth saying, No. Naomi, basically she's saying, you know, I love my mother-in-law. I have nothing to go back to either. I will go with you. And she goes there. And you ought to read the book of Ruth because it's the most lovely little romantic love story. It says, and Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth. Um, Boaz is the owner of a field, and he is a relative of Naomi. Now, do you remember what I told you a couple of women back about how marriage went in the Middle East with Tamar? Well, if there were no brothers, the next nearest male relative had the right to marry the widow. And Ruth comes, and Boaz catches a sight of her and falls in love with her. To the point, I'm almost having to do too much Old Testament law. Let's just say that there was a law in Israel that allowed her to follow people who were harvesting and allowed them to pick up the grains that were dropped by the harvesters. Because the law in Israel said you could only go once through a field. Anything that you did not glean the first pass was left for the poor and for the animals. And the poor could come through and grab whatever they saw on the ground after the gleaners had come through. And you also could not glean the edges of your fence. Do you know when you see this in the New Testament? You remember there was one time that Jesus and the disciples were taking a trip, and they pass and they grab some grain from a field as they're going by. And they get in trouble because it's a Sabbath, and somebody says, what are they doing working on the Sabbath? After all, they were gleaning, right? Well, they were allowed to do that because that field had already had one gleaning, and therefore they were not robbing. It also tells us another thing. That particular trip, they were rather poor if they were having to grab grain from the field as they went by. All right? But let's get back to Ruth. And you know what he says to the other women threshers and to the men? To the women threshers, he says, as you walk that way, let some grain accidentally drop from your sack, as though you were being careless when you were putting it in. And to the men he says, do not bother her. And I can just see all his gleaners and threshers looking at each other going, oh, Boaz likes Ruth. You ought to read the book of Ruth. He romances her. And at one point, there's even a scene where it turns out there's a male relative that is closer to Naomi in degrees of relationship than Boaz. And so he wants to buy Naomi's dead husband's land from Naomi, because, Naomi needs money. And they go before the elders, and Boaz says, well, it's a great thing you want to buy the land, but, she's got this daughter-in-law named Ruth, and if you buy the land, you have to marry Ruth. And the guy says, I can't marry Ruth. I'm already married, and I don't want a second wife. Remember, second wives were legal back then, but he was going, I can't take a second wife on. And Boaz, I recommend you read Ruth, basically goes, I'll take the field off your hand, and Ruth. And she marries Ruth. Ruth becomes the father of Jesse and the grandmother of King David and the great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus Christ. Are you getting interested in these women and these Old Testament stories? Now see, don't you regret not having gone back and read the Old Testament? See, everybody gets stuck on the genealogies and in Leviticus, and they never read the good stuff. We're not done yet. Though, I think I better get done because I can tell time has passed. I'll tell you that woman number 5 is Mary. And we'll leave off talking about her to if I'm ever back here during the Dormition or the Nativity or something. And he's already telling me I've got to stop, so. David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. They don't name her, but do you know what her name was? She's had movies made about her. Mind you, the Hollywood movies were so bad wrong, I don't recommend them. Have you ever seen a Hollywood movie that involved David and Bathsheba? This is Bathsheba, whom he murdered Uriah to get. Bathsheba was a victim. By the way, even when you read the Old Testament story, you need to read it close because Hollywood tends to go, oh, she was up there and, trying to attract him. No, what it says was David was home at a time when kings go to war, which is already a critique right there. Why are you here when your whole army is out at war? You should be out there with them. And it says that he saw Bathsheba and became interested in her. And the words that are used, both in the English translations and in Hebrew, was he sent his soldiers and took her. Now, if you send soldiers to take someone and you're the all-powerful king, did Bathsheba really have much chance to refuse? According to the Talmud, the old Jewish writings from before the time of Christ, Bathsheba was adjudged to have been an innocent victim. According to the early church fathers, not the later church fathers, the early church fathers, Bathsheba was adjudged to have been a victim. But then the same thing happened as with Tamar, and he had to cover up what had happened. And so David has Uriah killed. And when Joash comes back to notify him that Uriah was killed, as, a king who loves his people, and after all, by now David has multiple wives, he says, one of my soldiers has died in battle, I will take his wife. And he tries to cover up that she's expecting a child by him. She's been victimized. Worse, Nathan the prophet comes and says, David, what you did was wrong. God's not going to allow this child to be born. And Bathsheba miscarries. But God ends up rewarding her. You may not have heard of Bathsheba directly other than in the Hollywood movies. But Bathsheba becomes the image that we all use to talk about Mary sitting at the right hand of Jesus in heaven. Because the way that God gave justice to Bathsheba was that it was her second son, the one who lived, Solomon, who became the king. Solomon should have never been king. He had multiple brothers ahead of him. They either were killed or rebelled and were killed or were killed. God's justice can sometimes be rather harsh. And the son of David, who became king, was the son of the woman that he had victimized. And it says that when Solomon was king, that he sat his mother to his right on a throne. And if you read through the Old Testament, in several of the kings of Judah from then on, their mothers, the queen mother, not the married queen, which is what we do in England, right? England, it's the queen. In fact, if the queen is the direct descendant, she's in charge, and Prince Philip is just that, a prince. He's only a consort in England. But this is the Middle East. And Solomon begins to change a bit the way that at least queen mothers are treated, because from then on, you see the kings of the kings of Judah sitting their mothers at their right-hand side, which is actually what you see in the iconostas. Okay? And on his right, what do you know? The Queen Mother. She is Bathsheba, not only is eventually given a type of justice, but she's also rewarded, and she becomes the image for Mary, the Queen. In fact, if you look back at all the women I've mentioned, every one of them had a hard beginning. Did I say of any of them that they started out fine? No. Lied to by her father-in-law, running a certain type of house, widowed too early, and victimized. And God didn't deal justice the way we would expect. He dealt justice a different way. He brought every one of them into the lineage of the Son of God, of the human side of the Son of God. Think about what that says about his consideration for the victim. Think about his concern for those who are suffering. Now, again, our solution would have been a Hollywood one, right? Money, fall in love, plenty of kids. His solution is different. He honored every one of these women by bringing them into the Son of God's direct human lineage. And in the process, tells us how God thinks about those who have been victimized or suffered, which means it tells us how much he cares about us. It also explains in the New Testament, if those are Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-grandmamas, can you see maybe why Jesus was so concerned about the poor and about widows and about orphans? I'm sure the stories of his great-great-great-great-grandmamas had been passed down. That's why they were included in the genealogy. And Jesus, as a man here on earth, became one who cared for those who were victimized, those who were alone, those who needed help. This is the Sunday before Christmas. Yes, he came to give us salvation. Yes, he came so we could grow into the image of God. But he also came, as he quotes from the book of Luke, as the quote is in the book of Luke, that the blind may see, the lame walk, and so on. And he didn't mean that simply as a spiritual thing. He meant that as a practical thing. It's one of the reasons why I'm always so glad to come here and hear about the next time you're putting a bunch of food together to give out to people. Because I keep thinking this church is doing it correctly. You're worshiping correctly and you're behaving correctly. Can I say that Jesus' various grandmamas would be proud of you? They would. Because every one of them was in a bad place sometime in their life until God walked in and did something for each one of them. In the name of the Father, of the Son. Again and again in peace, let us pray to the Lord.
Lord, have mercy.
Help us, save us, have mercy on us, and protect us, O God, by your grace.
Lord, have mercy.